Hi, everybody.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I see we still have people coming in, so thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy our program this afternoon and evening. Frederick Law Olmsted, Music in the Park, hosted by our own Michael Leidig, a classical pianist and docent here with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. As I added in to the chat earlier, this event is offered as part of the Conservancy's Summer on the Emerald Necklace event series. This program is being held virtually this year as opposed to our normal in-person slate of concerts, fitness classes, and other events. And you can find out more about our upcoming programs at emeraldnecklace.org/summer on the Emerald Necklace. I've included a link in the chat. Tonight, we're really fortunate to have Michael with us. Michael is an incredible musician and knowledgeable in the ways of Frederick Law Olmsted, his life and his history. We're so thankful to have him joining us. So Michael, please take it away.
Thank you, Evan. And thanks everybody for joining. It is a great pleasure to be here for a very unique performance. And it brings together two of my great loves, nature and music. And I've been a docent for the Emerald Necklace, and they're a nonprofit. Please check out their website, as Evan said, and just great mission to open up the parks and make sure people know about them. And though I lived for 18 years in Brookline, right around the corner from many of the parks, I didn't know about several of the parks either. So my goal today is to acquaint you to Frederick Law Olmsted and the work that he has done. And then in between, I will play some music. So a majority of it actually is lecture, and then I will bring in 4 composers, and I'll explain why I've chosen the composers that I have. I'll be sharing my screen while I'm talking and showing slides, and then I will take that off and when I perform. All right, so here we go. So our goals for the Olmsted portion is discuss his life and major professional accomplishments and review his prized Boston creation, the Emerald Necklace. In terms of music, we're going to listen to several Boston-based composers who were performing and writing in the late 1800s around the time that Olmsted would have lived in Brookline, where I first lived when I moved here. We will visit Grenville Dean Wilson, mostly known as G.D. Wilson, Edvard MacDowell, Amy Marcy Cheney Beach, and we will also listen to one piece, one musician in the classical romantic era, and that's highlighted in the Boston Symphony Orchestra's opening 2 seasons, which were also during the time period that Olmsted lived here. And that composer is Mendelssohn. That is not Felix Mendelssohn. I am going to be playing Fanny Mendelssohn. So you may have noticed here, Amy Beach and Fanny Mendelssohn, that I am focusing on female composers. For G.D. Wilson and MacDowell, they had very strong women in their lives. So there's a focus not on Olmsted and music, but women, female composers, and their support of their husbands. And amazingly, Evan and I had planned this out. 100 years ago today, 8/18/1920, the 19th Amendment was ratified. So women and all of us, please get out there and vote. 100 years ago today. All right, I always start off every performance with this quote: "For the common things of every day, God gave men speech in the common way. For the deeper things men think and feel, God gave the poets words to reveal. For heights and depths no words can reach, God gave men music, the soul's own speech." And that was given to me while I was performing at a wedding many years ago. And Claire, Natalie, if you're out there, that still hangs in my home. So thank you for that gift. And just a little information about me. That's me on the left in one of my first recitals. My sister's on the other side of one of my very first piano teachers. All right, so the criteria again are for Boston composers. Grenville Dean Wilson, he was born in Lenox, 1833 to 1897. Edvard MacDowell, also born in Boston, 1860 to 1908. Amy Cheney Beach, 1867 to 1944, also in Boston. The BSO, the first season, 1881 to 1882. It's just a little information about that. There were 20 Saturday 8 p.m. programs with public rehearsals prior the Friday at 2:30. Currently, they do public rehearsals on Thursday mornings at 10:30, which are always fun to attend, though not this year. Season tickets back then cost you $5 to $10, and you could go to an individual concert for as little as a quarter. Opening night in 1881, Beethoven piece was played, The Consecration of the House of Overture, and that piece was played at every opening night for the first 3 seasons. In the second season, 1882 to 1883, the 15th program in 1883 included Mendelssohn's Opus 94, 2 Songs Without Words, one of which I play. Again, I'm not playing Felix, I'm playing Fanny. And Fanny actually wrote 6 of his songs without words that he published as his own. And yes, I'll get into that a little bit more later. Okay, so I'll be swapping between Olmsted history and then music. So that was the intro to get us started. Many pictures of Olmsted, 1948, and then 1960. Or 1860, 1895, and this is in the same year, very, very famous portrait done by John Singer Sargent. So his history, 1822 to 1983, 1903, 81 years old. He was among the first to regard landscape architecture as a profession in fine art. He is considered the most eminent and successful person ever to practice that craft in the United States. He was born into a very prosperous family of fabric merchants in Hartford, Connecticut. His schooling, he and his brother were groomed for Yale, but incredibly, and it's related obviously to the outdoors and nature, sumac poisoning injured his eyes, and doctors at the time suggested he avoid studies. So fortunate for us. He was a little bit wayward, or perhaps very wayward. He took part in all of these different jobs: surveyor's apprentice, dry goods clerk, sailor, scientific farmer, writer, journalist and reporter, and a superintendent. And of course, down here, the big one, park maker, though it took him quite a long time to get there. For farming, didn't work out because apparently he was of slight build. His publishing work didn't work out. It went bankrupt in 1857. He didn't do so well as a trip as a seaman to China. He was appalled, though, by the harsh treatment of sailors. And so that will come back into play in terms of his focus and philosophy. He also tried a little gold prospecting out in California and didn't do so well out there. He was the executive secretary of the U.S. Sanitary Commission during the Civil War, and that was the predecessor of the Red Cross. He did a walking tour of England, which was a huge influence on him, especially with the rural landscape, and that can be seen in much of his work. And then the newly created Birkenhead Park transformed 125 acres in industrial Liverpool into an amazing park for all walks of life. And that will also come back into play in his parks, and I'll talk about that. One of the major influences was as a New York Times journalist. They hired him to do a 9-month, 4,000-mile travel to report on Southern living, including slavery. Initially, he didn't support slavery, but he did accept it as a component of society, particularly Southern society. However, he became a staunch abolitionist after seeing slave treatment, similar to, and not to equate the two, but seeing how humans were treated on ships as well. He visited a German settlement near San Antonio, and it was one of the very few towns in Texas that did not have slavery. Their focus was on community life, education, independence, hard work, and the love of arts. And he embraced all of those. Some of his publications, Walks and Talks, American Farmer in England, and this was one of 3 books that came out from his southern travels. He worked tirelessly, and doctors suggested he was working himself to death with insomnia, fatigue, headaches, and tinnitus. He was eventually committed to McLean Hospital, and ironically, in 1872, he was actually commissioned to design their grounds. And apparently a quote from him while he was there looking around, he said, "They didn't carry out my plan, confound them." He viewed parks as works of art and a necessity for urban life. They provide psychological calm and mental refreshment from surrounding stressful city for everyone, regardless of social status. How interesting now that many of us during COVID are using nature and the Emerald Necklace parks and all parks really for that psychological calm, just given the isolation that many of us are experiencing. Being out in nature just has a very calming and restorative effect. His other goal was to never see the engineering underneath, and that's particularly relevant in one of the parts of the Emerald Necklace that I will talk about. Little history about Romantic music before I start to play a piece for you. The Romantic era ran about a century from 1815 to 1910. Again, that's not to say 1814 was the classical era, and January 1st of 1815, everybody switched over to Romantic. There's obviously some overlap, but started to see some Romantic era playing and concepts come into play during the early 1800s. Beethoven is one in particular that was considered a transitional composer into, he had some romantic components, and then Schubert was really the transitional composer from the classical to the Romantic era. From a very, very simplistic perspective, music just sounded bigger with full chords, rich texture, and expressive compared to the classical era. It was more focused on individualism and personal feeling. Each composer had their own particular style. There were new musical forms like etudes, nocturnes, and impromptus. I will play an impromptu today. It oftentimes avoided music rules, so the composers were seen as rebels of sorts. And they also, at the time period, were mimicking the culture and the atmosphere at the time, such as things like the French Revolution. There were differences in structure, style, sound, and mood, reflecting those differences in political landscape. Capitalism at the time brought inhumane work conditions as factories blossomed, and there was a return to pre-Joseph II society where lower classes were segregated and denigrated. So you can see how the social environment had really been influencing Olmsted on many, many levels. Okay, so moving on to our first composer, very little known, Fanny Cecil Mendelssohn Hensel. 1805 to 1847. She died relatively young at 41, and so many composers did. Mozart, 35, Schubert, 31, Mendelssohn died very soon after her at age 37. So many, many composers died young. And that always strikes me thinking, wow, we would have had 20, 30 more years of their music if they hadn't passed away so young. So Moses Mendelssohn, her father in 1820 wrote, "Music will become Felix's profession, while it can and must be only an ornament for you." Ironically, Fanny means free, but she was not free to perform or publish her truly gifted talent. Some would suggest that she was a better pianist and perhaps composer in some degree than her younger brother. She suffered greatly, and no doubt we do as well, giving the missed compositions and publications. Her only public performance was a charity benefit in 1838, and that was allowed. Women could do charity events. They were not allowed to accept money. Only 50 of 500 works were ever published, and of those 500 works, there are many different types of pieces, but many focused on the piano. Few remain, several published as Felix's, as I said. She published 6 of his songs without words, and there's a story that when asked, giving a performance to the Queen of England, which was her favorite, she selected one that Fanny actually wrote. So there they are, Felix and Fanny. Despite the cultural times and the prevention for her to play, they loved one another dearly. And in fact, Felix passed away 6 months after she died, because he fell into a great depression. That's his piano. It's an Orard piano, and it was the favorite type that he liked to play. Pianists had their favorite pianos. Beethoven liked Broadwood. Orard was Mendelssohn. Pleyel was Chopin, and Orard was also Liszt. And Orard pianos were stronger. They had stronger frames, and they had stronger strings. Any of you that have heard Liszt's music, he was the rock star of the day and pounds the piano like you wouldn't believe. And he was known for breaking strings, and they would actually have to have a piano off stage, like now they would have guitars, to roll one in after he broke one. So enough talking for me. Thank you for listening. Fanny's piece today is an impromptu, and it was written in 1822. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I am going to tilt my screen down so that you can see my fingers. So an impromptu by Fanny Mendelssohn. So back to sharing my screen with you. Moving on to some Olmsted information. So now we're going to focus on some of his major works. They included 6,000 commissions from 1883 to 1979. Well, he certainly didn't live to 1979, as I already mentioned, when he passed away. His sons continued his business until 1979, still creating parks and parkways and recreation areas. Those exist in 46 of 50 states. So it's likely that many of you out there have something of his creation in your area. 140,000 plans and drawings, 66,000 photos, many of which are kept and archived in Fairstead, which is in Brookline. For those of you that are local, it's very close, and I didn't even realize it was here for many years after living in Brookline. It's not open now, but normally it would be Wednesday to Sunday, and there's a wonderful guide there. And in '79, it was approved as a National Historic Site. That's a picture of it. In terms of Brookline, and sorry for folks that are out of state, but just focusing on this area since this is where I lived for so many years, 200 projects are actually in Brookline, and I think few realize that. Not only one of the major park, the Emerald Necklace, which winds its way into Brookline for a little section, there are many subdivisions, communities that exist now, and I've been to all of these, and I'm sure many of you have: Aspinwall, Fisher, Corey, and Pill Hill. Streets that those locally have all been on, I'm sure, as well. Beacon Street was the main thoroughfare through the area, and if any folks had visited me that were out there, we may have gone to some sushi restaurants on that street. Chestnut Hill is a big area that he influenced, and many other streets that are listed here. Okay, now that I can get beyond the Boston focus for a little bit, major works throughout the United States. Central Park is most familiar with his works, but also in New York, Prospect Park, and that's actually the largest open space in the United States for a park. He was involved with Yosemite. Here's Central Park, another picture of that, and that, of course, is Yosemite. He was involved with Niagara Falls, and I have some pictures that I took while I was there this time of year, 1 year ago, with family. And while they did the Maid of the Mist, I decided to walk around Goat Island, which is about 3 miles, and I had never done that before. The U.S. Capitol grounds, the Great White City in 1893, the World's Columbian Exposition, he was involved in that. And Buffalo, for those out there in Buffalo, and I know that there's probably a couple, the first park system in all of his work was in Buffalo, and it was the precursor to the Emerald Necklace, consisting of 6 parks. Everyone has seen that photo of Niagara Falls, and that's what we think about. Oh, and if you see photos with, or any slides with the Emerald Necklace, I have been allowed to share those. So thanks, Evan, and all the folks at the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. This is one that I took. These are shots from Goat Island, which really represent a lot of Olmsted's view and landscape. He loved to create vistas and looking through, so trees really create that viewing right there. Another one, I think this is a beautiful shot and very much his work. He oftentimes worked around waterways, and then you see the trees again flanking the side and opens up this vista there. I show this because this type of bridge, it's a rustic style, shows up in so many of his architecture style, including, you'll see it many times in the Emerald Necklace. Picture of the mall, I know all of us have seen that, and another one. So I had mentioned part of his vision, pastoral and picturesque. rustic structures, which I mentioned, waterways that I mentioned, lush plantings, and beautiful yet functional, such as flood control. I will address that to a greater degree when we get into the Riverway park of the Emerald Necklace, and just the restorative power for all that I also mentioned earlier, and that all of us, I think, or many of us are benefiting from that now. This was a picture of one of my favorite areas along the Muddy River. So I probably walked this almost daily, and definitely during the 7 years that I worked with, over here to the right, Children's Hospital. So I would pass this daily for 7 years. Again, waterways, rustic structure, beautiful plantings along here. And this area is gorgeous at all times of year, but particularly in the fall. Also, similar to what we're dealing with now with COVID, during that time, and there was an issue with water quality, and that area in particular that I will shed more light on, I found this interesting. Be temperate in eating and drinking. Avoid ripe fruits and or raw vegetables and unripe fruits. Abstain from cold water and all ardent spirits. You know, sleep and clothe warm, of course, and not to mention, don't sleep or sit in a draft of air, and avoid getting wet, and attend to immediately to all disorders of the bowels. So, sound advice now and then. Another picture of that rustic structure. You can see the democracy of the parks that were important for him. So, moving on to the music side of things. That fellow right there is Grenville Dean Wilson, G.D. Wilson, and I would suspect, I would hazard a guess that maybe 1% of you know about him. Unless you've seen me play before, then that'll ratchet up the percent as I try and focus on little known classical composers. So 1833 to 97 in Lenox, 150 pieces. And many of them, like the one that I will play today, they had these sweet, joyful names. So he is not the, you know, Fanny Mendelssohn with impromptus, certainly not, you know, sonatas and symphonies or even string orchestrations. He was focused on very lighthearted piano music. Happy Days, Merry Bells, A Night in June, The Fairest One, Morning, Sleep Well, Dreaming of Home, Tripping Through the Meadows, of course, Westward Ho. So those are very emblematic of his writing. Today I'm going to play what is considered his most famous. And if you can consider that the most famous, because most haven't heard of it. It was famous during the time that he lived, though. And it was said to be on the stands of every teenage girl a pianist, and it is very emblematic of his work. So how am I roping in the influence of women? Well, every teenage girl pianist played that, and I can see, you know, a family dinner with visitors there after dinner, and they're coaxing their teenage, oh, come up here and play. I mean, I know I had to do that. So if mom and dad, if you're out there, thank you. That's actually the publication of the piece. And oops, that's next. The other influence that women in particular, he spent much of his life teaching piano at a secondary all women's school. So he was the piano instructor there for many years, and no doubt influenced the lives and reciprocal influence from the many female students that he had. All right, so I'm gonna play the Shepherd Boy. It's relatively brief. It is, yeah, it's short, and it's similar to the style that those other pieces with those cute, joyful names would be. So here you go. So there you go, a short, sweet piece by G.D. Wilson. All right, moving on to more information about Olmsted, and now I'm going to focus on the Emerald Necklace. So for those of you that are local, and even for some of you that are out there, family and friends of mine that may be watching, you have likely experienced some of this on some level, as I love this and took a lot of family and friends there. So overall, the Emerald Necklace consists of 9 parks. 6 of those were designed by Olmsted. It consists of 1,100 acres, 7 miles, and there are 3 owners of that. Olmsted, as I said, 6 parks, and those are the Back Bay Fens, the Riverway, Jamaica Pond, Olmsted Park, Arnold Arboretum, and Franklin Park. Here's what it looks like in terms of how it tracks out. Here's the Back Bay Fens, Riverway. This is Olmsted Park. For 18 years, I lived right here. Then Jamaica Pond, Arnold Arboretum, and then crossing this, what is still considered a little challenging at times because of the traffic and, again, Boston drivers. Though recently I was in Maryland, and honestly, I felt the Maryland drivers were way worse. Anyway, and then Franklin Park, the largest of the parks. So it was designed from 1872 to 1892. The Emerald Necklace was then completed in 1895. The Arboretum, 1872, was established, and in 1877, he was commissioned for the design of that. And then the various other parks came into play in the years after. As I mentioned, 3 owners. It's the Boston Parks and Recreation, the Brookline Parks and Open Space, because it does slide through just a part of Brookline for a little bit and then goes back into Boston, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. A nice picture of the Back Bay Fens, and if any of you have been here to visit, that's the Prudential Tower in the back there. Now, it wasn't always, as pretty as that might be. It was actually a noxious open sewer, yes. So Olmsted was hired, and this gets to his point of beauty, and not being able to see the architecture part of it below it. So the goal was to flush out stagnant water and then add in naturalistic plantings. And it truly was a horrible stench. It was described as the foulest marsh and muddy flats to be found anywhere in Massachusetts. And some would wager in many different states it took top notch there. This is a picture of, in 1882, of the Gatehouse. It was not designed by Olmsted, but rather Richardson. And this now is where the Emerald Necklace Conservancy houses their visitor center. So locally, folks, if you haven't been there, it's a wonderful, wonderful place. And when COVID allows us to get back to group gatherings, this is where the bike tours that I lead of the Emerald Necklace as part of my docent volunteer work, they start there. Some pictures of what it took like to put in the tunnels, the gatehouses for the flow of water. That's the MFA right in the backyard. In the 1920s, there was a City Beautiful movement, and Olmsted's creation was altered, and he would be horrified by these things. More roadways and bridges would have been put in. He wanted open space for people to roam without distractions, and certainly roadways and bridges would do that. A rose garden was added in 1932, the Victory Gardens in 1942. They still exist today. The Veterans Memorial, and there's a Japanese temple bell that, though casted in 1675, it was eventually gifted in 1953 as a symbol of peace. So this is the Rose Garden, and I am putting that in now just to show you a few pictures, not just because it's beautiful, but because I am going to play To a Wild Rose, which is Edvard MacDowell's most famous piece. Born in 1860 until 1908, he passed at the age of 47. Born into a Quaker family, and ironically, his mom was Fanny. So there's a link to strong women there. Influences were German composers in particular, Brahms and Schumann, Liszt and Grieg, and artists as well. He secretly married his piano students at the age of 24 while he was studying in Germany, and as was oftentimes appropriate for the times, she gave up a promising performance career. In 1888, they returned to the United States and stayed in Boston before moving to New York, where he was the first professor at Columbia, music professor. And in 1904, he resigned from that due to a conflict with the new president. As I mentioned, he is very well known for woodland sketches and a few of these other collection of pieces, and To a Wild Rose is the one of the sketches in Woodland Sketches. And he is considered the single most important early 20th century American composer. And that's what he looked like. He's got that same mustache as G.D. Wilson, so it must have been the thing of the day. And he is one of 5 American composers honored in this 1940 stamp series. A little bit more information, and this gets into how his wife was integral in supporting him and getting his music out to the public. There is a farm in Peterborough, New Hampshire, close by, called the MacDowell Colony, and Marion helped keep this going, and also for 48 years as she lived to the age of 98, promoting his music throughout the United States. So the colony and Marion in particular helped support American composers with philanthropic funding. Some examples: Copland, Samuel Barber, Bernstein, and actually Amy Beach, which I will mention later, and I will play her music. Just to note some of the major accomplishments that have come out of composers from there: 13 Grammys, 8 Academy Awards, 30 Tonys, 86 Pulitzers, 30 National Book Awards, and 31 MacArthur Fellowships. So what an incredible gift, not only to these artists, but all of us. And thank you to Marion for keeping that colony going. And it still goes on. So the top picture is what it looked like, and the bottom picture is what it is now. Little inside, nice little lodge to hang out in, play some ping pong. And Bernstein worked on some very important of his masterpieces, and he visited for 3 separate years. He was allowed to go there, all expenses paid again. A picture of Marion and MacDowell, and he has about 150 works, and lots of information on him. Well, not a ton compared to other composers, but definitely look up his work online if you can. So again, today's piece, To a Wild Rose, the first piece of 10 woodland sketches in 1896, most well known and loved. Many have adapted this. Nat King Cole has one of the most famous adaptations. And not only was there the name of it, and he loved roses. So this is really a love of his, and he was very much influenced by nature and trees, so woodland sketches, and it makes me think of Olmsted's work as well. Okay, so MacDowell's To a Wild Rose. I'm going to play it through as it was traditionally written, and then I'm going to do a little improvisation to it. And it is very modern sounding, so well ahead of its time, and is reminiscent, for me at least, of some Gershwin. So a lovely piece by Edward MacDowell, played through the first time as he wrote it, and then just done a little improvisation. It's such a beautiful piece. I could just continue to play that and improvise it as well. It lends very nicely to turning it into jazz and blues, which then leads me to the feeling that it's similar to Gershwin, particularly in the chord structure. Of note, my piano teacher in that one of those early pictures only wanted me to play classical, and when I protested in my early teens, she allowed me to play Gershwin. So there you go. All right, so back to sharing my screen. Moving on for the end of our talk with Olmsted and music. Just a few more pictures. You have some victory gardens, and then here is in the Back Bay Fens. This is the water flow, and you'll see this brown stuff. Well, that's an invasive species called Phragmites, and it has really cut into the flow of the river, and there's movement now to get rid of that. Thank goodness. Another one of those structures that you can see throughout the Emerald Necklace, but also as I had shown in Niagara Falls. That's what it looked like back in his day, now and in his day. So that's the Back Bay Fens, and moving on to the Riverway in 1890, a freshwater course bordered by passages of rushy meadow and varied slopes is how he had described it. Entirely man-made, river was rerouted, banks sculpted, park walks, bridle paths, carriage roads added, and ponds created where marsh had only existed previously. This is what it looks like, or looked like then, and this church is still there. I have walked this path. There's a circle route that you can do all around it. Again, many times over 18 years. Another picture of it, excuse me, right here, and this is more updated with the paths on either side. Another picture here, that church is in the background. There are some original structures that still exist now. Here's more of those bridges. And this bridge still exists. And you can see this was a bridle path. And then if you note over here, this gentleman walking, there would have been a people path, a carriage path, and then up here is the third level of the parkway, and cars eventually, and horses. That's a picture of that now. This is a picture that I took. This was one of my favorite pictures to take over many years. Another area of this, and I didn't include the picture, but I took the same photo every week, every Wednesday at about the same time, 10-ish in the morning, to document the change. So 52 photos, 52 weeks, same picture. One of my favorite areas. That's what it looks like in the fall. That's what it looks like in the summer. Another shot of it. This is what happens when it floods. You can see that flooding, and one of the reasons why there was a major project that was undertaken. There was a worse flood, and I'll talk about that now, the 1996 flood. It went 11 feet above normal. The subway was flooded and out of commission for months. Hospitals, schools, businesses, homes damaged, and the Army Corps of Engineers was brought in to assist with fixing that situation. Because of that, the Emerald Necklace Conservancy decided to embark on the mission to collect funds to maintain it. That's what happens when 11 feet of water gets added to a small muddy river. Okay, so we did the Fens, we just did the Riverway, now on to Olmsted Park. 1891, it was a chain of fresh water ponds alternating with attractive natural groves and meads, consisting of 3 ponds. And just for you fish folks out there, it is one of the very few places for the very rare 3-spine stickleback to live and spawn. So there you go. Olmsted Park in 1890. Very few changes were made here. Some design and paths, some bridges that were put in, and some planting. It's the second largest forest cover of the ponds, and like I said, there are 6 of those bridges. This is a picture, and obviously of Olmsted, one of the larger ponds, Leverett. And you see this. This isn't just mist or fog. Well, it is fog, but human-made fog. There was a artist exhibition who she is from Japan, and her work is focused on outdoor exhibitions utilizing fog. And this is not the fog that you would have in, say, an indoor concert to have a cool effect at a rock stage. She developed this from a natural way and using a mechanism that she created to create this fog from fresh water. And of note, her father developed the technology for artificial snow. A picture of that area, and I've walked and ran and biked through this. Another one of those bridges that keeps popping up. This is a picture that I took, and again, you can see the fog in the background, and another perfect example of Olmsted. You have the trees flanking either side, and there's this beautiful view that if you're taking your time and going slow, which is what he wanted, he would have been appalled at seeing scooters and electric bikes and regular bikes with people flying through here. Okay, so that's Olmsted Park. Moving about less than a mile up to here, when leading a bike tour, for those of you that are interested, one of the toughest parts of this, and it's very brief, is a pretty good hill climb here. So anyway, if you're ever interested, if we can get back to doing bike tours, just keep that in mind. This from here, all flat. Right here, just get your legs in shape. Jamaica Pond, 1892, only a few modifications and really just preserving the vegetation. 70 acres, and there's a 1.5 mile path. It is 50 feet deep, which you would really not guess. It was a kettle hole, and hence the deepness, and by glacier action, and it's fed by natural springs. It functioned as a summer treat, despite the fact that it is probably only 2 miles, if that, outside of Boston Center. But hey, if you had money back then, you had your downtown home and you had your summer retreat a couple miles away. Ice harvesting, I wanted to just comment a little bit about this because, again, in Brookline, right behind where I live was the Brookline Ice and Coal Company, which is one of the largest ice producers and distributes all throughout Massachusetts. So the mid-19th century, there was ice cutting. In 1855, there's first evidence of the first commercial company. In 1875, the Globe reported that anywhere from 350 to 600 men, depending on the time of year, made $1.75 a day. There were 22 ice houses storing 30,000 tons of ice by 1880. And because Boston is known for its breweries, particularly due to the German immigrants that stayed in this area, and they opened up many of those breweries. Many of those went away during Prohibition. A few of them came back, but they needed 100 team of horses to get out to 25 breweries just in Boston. Another picture that I took of the fog and flow coming off Jamaica Pond. This is at the same time of year. We did this in October. So the trees right here are just starting to turn. Beautiful colors. And then again, you have this open cutting space to look through beyond. You can boat on there. The boathouse is in the background. And that's an aerial picture of the pond. You can walk around it. You cannot bike around it. Okay, so moving on to the Arnold Arboretum. As I mentioned, there's a big hill there for bikes. This stretch is a challenge, so we do a little detour and come over this way. And that's because this has one of the busiest and scariest rotaries in the area. If you've been to Boston, you combine crazy drivers with a rotary and like a 3-lane rotary with one, two, three, four, about 6 different roads coming in there. It's you don't want to bike in there, so we don't. So we get there safely, and we learn that in 1872, or it was created or finished in 1872. It started in 1842 when Bussey gave some land, Arnold gave some later, and they combined in 1872 to make the Arboretum. 281 acres, 15,000 trees and shrubs and vines. Harvard University curates the collection and maintains the landscape. Boston owns it though and leases it to the school for $1 a year. I don't know if they need that $1 a year, but anyway, they got it for 1,000 years. Charles Sprague Sargent was a scientist that collected the thousands of the specimens and grouped by gender, or I'm sorry, genus, and then Olmsted laid out the road system. One of my favorite trees that are in the park. A few buds and flowers. This is the main pond that's in the park. It's the rosacea part of the garden. Unlike Olmsted would have done, he would have had varieties of trees together. Sprague saw it differently and sections them. So you have your rosacea plants that are not only roses, but those are fruit trees. So a lot of these are fruit trees, and you can see some blossoms here, but when that whole area lights up, it's just amazing. I am a tree spotter for the Arboretum, which means I go around and I look at the trees and spot them for phenological phases, documenting changes most likely or definitely due to global warming, if you believe in that sort of thing. I do, and so I spot the birches, which are in one section, and the maples that are in another, and a few of the buckeyes. A few more pictures. Okay, so Arnold Arboretum and running on to Franklin Park. I mentioned a challenging rotary here. This section can be a little challenging as well. It's better now after they redid the some of the work there. Okay, so Franklin Park, 1885, originally was the West Roxbury Park, renamed to honor Ben Franklin. And they did that in hopes that they would get to tap into a trust fund of his. Well, after they named it, he decided not to give him that access, and so Boston had to borrow $2 million. Anyway, so important to make sure you have your funding before you name something after someone. Labeled as, of course, you could have changed it, the name of it. I think it just become ingrained for so long that they didn't. So labeled as a country park, and it is considered the crown jewel. 527 acres, the largest of the parks, 6 miles of roads, 15 miles of pedestrian and bridle paths, and now it is 485 acres, as some of the land was given to a local hospital in 1954, and this was very controversial to do at the time, and actually still is. Most recreational of the parks, as I had mentioned, he did not want recreation. He wanted open space. He didn't want roads through there. He didn't want monuments. He didn't want rose gardens or victory gardens. However, with this one, he gave in, and a third of the northern third of the park is an amphipark, and which includes some space for activities, including in 1896 a golf course, which was the first public golf course in Boston and the second in the nation. Boston's always trying to be the first at anything, so you know, they were first for themselves and in Boston, but second in the nation. So a zoo was added that still exists now. I've been there many times, and not only are there great animals, but there's an amazing climbing structure for kids, not open now, of course. It was designed by Arthur Shirtcliffe, and it was free until 1958. And then in 1901, it was handed over to a nonprofit, like many things are. And this is a picture that I took, combining the fog from the Fog and Flow outdoor exhibition with that rustic bridge look that we continue to see over and over again. There was also bear gardens, so that the gardens still exist to the day, but no bears. And there was tennis courts. So how about that? We got a little natural grass there. So you play your tennis, hit the zoo, round the golf. So now moving on to Amy Beach. So we're done with Olmsted, and I hope that you appreciated that lecture just to learn more about his life. Again, it's important for me to talk about his work, as I don't think it's realized the contribution that he has had, not only here, but throughout the United States, and particularly for being so open to individuals of all races, background, gender, age, you name it. That was new and a main mission for him. And it broke down, or the intent was to break down barriers, so that if you were in the park, whether you were in your three-piece suit or not, you were equal. And that space was to be a shared space. And that's so important now that we recognize that and continue to follow his mission. So Amy Beach was a very little known composer, not necessarily in Boston. She's more well known here, but not sure about other states and other folks that enjoy classical music. So Amy Marcy Cheney Beach, 1867 to 1944, a long life, 77 years. She was born in New Hampshire and moved to Chelsea in 1875. Very early on, she showed signs of being a child prodigy. And one example of what that could look like was she composed 4 piano waltzes at the age of 4. Now that's pretty good, you know. Mozart, first composition was at age 5. Hey, but Mozart then toured Europe at age 6. So Beethoven did the same, but at age 7. Anyway, she did it at 4, so that's pretty good. And what is more amazing is that she did it without a piano. So it was all in her head. She got home and then wrote the 4 waltzes out. Not bad for somebody the age at 4. I certainly wasn't doing that. And I didn't start playing to the age of 6, and certainly in no way pretend that I play anywhere near like her or most classical composers. So her concert debut was at the age of 16. That was a rondo in E flat. Her music starred in the 1884-85 season, so perhaps Olmsted would have gotten there during the first 4 seasons that were started, and certainly he lived past the 4 seasons, but 1892, major compositional success with her Mass in E flat, and a very well-known performance group here for classical music is the Handel and Haydn Society. And hers was the first female composed piece since the 1850 inception of that organization. So she really was paving the way and well ahead of her time. Her first symphony, composed and published by an American woman, was October 1896. She joined the Boston Five, so it became the Boston Six. One of the 5 that you'll notice was Edvard MacDowell, so she knew him well. In 1885, she married Surgeon, and these were the conditions that were levied. So again, strong women. This sounds not okay now, of course, but it was the case in the times and across the pond too with Fanny. He stated, live according to the function of society. That meant she could not teach piano. She could devote time to composition, but not perform it. And she had to limit her public recitals to 2 per year, and the profits were donated to charity. So that's how she got to do her VSO premiere. But can you imagine a woman that had so much beautiful music, and I'll play one of her pieces shortly, only allowed to perform that 2 times a year? So other people could perform her music, but sadly not her. In 1900, they premiered her piano concerto with her as soloist. So again, payments going to charity. And starting in 1921, she spent each summer at the MacDowell colony composing. So yet another example of how much benefit the MacDowell colony gave her, so many composers, and continues to this day. In 1940, she retired and passed away in New York City in 1944. She is buried in Forest Hill Cemetery, which is right across the street from Franklin Park, literally. In 2000, she was added to 86 other composers on the granite wall of Esplanade's Hatch Shell. And that is where they fire off the fireworks and is on TV. And many of you have probably seen that across the US. And not this past July, of course. Not sure when that'll be back. Regardless, when it does, her name will still be on that granite wall. And what I didn't even realize, in September 5th, 2017, our current mayor, Marty Walsh, declared Amy Beach Day in honor of her 150th birthday. So how about that? Coming up on September 5th, 3 years after the declaration, please remember to maybe play a piece of her music. You can find some on YouTube or Spotify. So there you go. 5 symphonic works, including her famous symphony, 15 choral works, and her famous Mass in E-flat, and 150 songs. And what I'm going to play is one of hers that is one of her most well-known, which is Barcarolle, which is it's a song traditionally sung by Venetian gondoliers. So think of that while listening to it. And it's one of a set of 3 character pieces. So her intent was to mimic or envision. So she envisioned Venetian gondoliers, and that promoted her music. Just like with MacDowell envisioning so many seascapes and trees, or G.D. Wilson had, I'm sure, visions of those jolly songs, and maybe a shepherd boy as he wrote. Lots of references, and I'm just going to share these now. And here's a link to the Emerald Necklace. All of you are familiar with the website, given that you have registered for this, and thank you for attending. And as I had mentioned earlier, a lot of the readings and information came to me through them in the 6-week docent training that I went to. So if any of my fellow docents are out there, hi. And with their permission, and as I mentioned, the photos with their logo on it are theirs, otherwise they are mine. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and play Beaches. Okay. So there you go, Amy Beach's Barcarolle, and it really exhibits a lot of the music that would have happened in the Romantic era. If you remember when I described what that was like, you have those big chords, it's loud, it's soft, it's lush, and then there's some dissonance in there too, just at a few parts. So it's beautiful to play, but there's a little bit of underlying angst in there at times too. So the workshop references are here for you. And I think if Evan is still out there, Evan, we do have some time for questions. And if there aren't any, then I'll finish up with another piece. So what do we got out there? Any questions?
Yeah, I did have a question earlier. If you could list out the 4 pieces you performed this evening thus far. I wrote them down, but I might have missed the first one, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce it.
Sure. Let me go back to the beginning here. Did you want me to show them or just mention them by name?
Show them and yeah, mention them. I think would be fantastic.
Let me see where they are. So the first one would have been by Fanny Mendelssohn. And let's see, Fanny Mendelssohn's piece is here. Ubenstuck, I guess. Pardon my German family if you're out there. Feel free to send in the correct pronunciation for that, but that's Fanny's piece. And it's considered an impromptu. And then G.D. Wilson's piece was The Shepherd Boy. So The Shepherd Boy is right here. There we go. So it's Opus 4 from 1903 for the exact title. And then Edvard MacDowell's is To a Wild Rose. I won't repeat that one. That's an easy one for folks to remember. And then Amy Beach's is Barcarolle, and I'll pull it up here because she has many of these, and I just want to make sure folks are interested. They have so it's number 1 in B flat, Opus 28 from 1894. And if you just type this in, oftentimes it's hard to find it. So I would type in this right there, and then it'll come up with the 3 pieces. If you get it from a library, you get the CD. If any of you don't use iTunes or Spotify, you'll get a CD with all 3 of those on it. So any other questions out there?
I certainly want to give anyone just a second or 2 more, maybe 30 more seconds. If anyone has any questions about presentation, any of the composers or pieces played this evening. And if not, Michael will round us out with a final piece.
Yeah, many of you, if you've heard me play before, especially during the challenging times that we have, I love the piece Somewhere Over the Rainbow. You can find that online. I've sent it out to many folks if you're out there. For those of you that aren't, my email information was on the screen. Feel free to email me for that. And let me show that while I play this piece. So there you go. Yep, so feel free to email me if you want the link to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and that was done through the help of the Dedham Library, and they added a really nice slideshow to that. So, okay, that's...
Oops, sorry, Michael. I'm not seeing anything else popping up. So again, one more time, just before Michael takes us out, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. I really appreciate y'all coming out and watching, especially on a beautiful evening like tonight. Again, this event was offered as part of the Emerald Necklace Conservancy Summer on the Emerald Necklace program series. You can find out more about the upcoming events we have throughout the end of the summer at emeraldnecklace.org. And have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Okay, thanks so much, Evan. I really appreciate the invitation. And Evan, did you say if the sound and video quality are okay, this will be posted for others to view? Or?
Yes, so we In case you came in a bit later or want to share this with other people, we will be posting this on our YouTube channel, Emerald Necklace Conservancy, tomorrow afternoon. So keep a lookout for that on our social media and on our e-blasts, e-newsletters, one of which should come out this week. Thanks again, everybody.
Okay, thanks everybody, and somewhere over the rainbow. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Thanks again, Evan, and I hope you enjoyed the music. I hope that you enjoyed the education, not only of composers, but also of, and very importantly, Olmsted's work. It's great for me to combine these two loves of mine. Thank you again, and make sure you go out and vote. I hope all of you appreciated the theme of strong women, and just today, 100 years ago, the ratifying of the 19th Amendment allowing women to vote. So, and also a call out to someone that has a birthday out there, Gia. So hope it was good for you. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you, at least your name's popping up. And if not, you can see me. Be well.